I first noticed it at 4:17 p.m. Not because anything dramatic happened. There was no explosion of light, no strange sound, no sudden realization. It was the quiet repetition that did it. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I glanced at the clock on the wall. 4:17 p.m. I remember the time clearly because I had been waiting for 4:30. I had a delivery coming. I kept checking the clock out of habit. I looked down at my phone. 4:17 p.m. Normal. I stood up, walked to the sink, poured a glass of water, stared out the window for what felt like several minutes, then returned to the table. The clock still read 4:17. I frowned, not confused, just mildly irritated. I assumed the battery had died, but the second hand was moving. Tick, 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 smooth, steady, working. I checked my phone again. 4:17 p.m. The seconds were moving. Time was passing, but the minute would not change. I waited, at first calmly, then deliberately. The second hand completed a full rotation. Then another, then another. The minute stayed frozen at 17. I refreshed my phone screen, turned Wi-Fi off and on, opened another app that displayed the time. Everywhere. 4:17 p.m. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt small, like a glitch, something explainable. I stepped outside. The sky was that pale late afternoon blue that always precedes evening. The sun hung low, but not low enough to feel urgent. I looked at my neighbor's porch clock. 4:17 p.m. He was sitting in a chair, reading. I almost asked him what time it was, but something stopped me. What if he said 4:17? I walked back inside. Another full minute passed. 4:17. I opened my laptop. The system time matched. I unplugged it, let the battery run. Still 4:17. It wasn't the time had stopped. It was that it had chosen a shape and refused to move forward. I began counting manually. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. At 60, I expected 4 to 18. It remained 4:17. I counted again. Nothing changed. I tried not looking at clocks. I forced myself to read a book for what felt like 20 minutes. When I checked again. 4:17 p.m. The light outside hadn't shifted. The shadows were identical. Even the air felt paused. That's when the first strange thing happened. The delivery arrived. A knock at the door. 3 firm taps. I opened it. The courier stood there holding a box. "Running a little late," he said. I looked past him at the sky, unchanged. "What time is it?" I asked. He glanced at his wrist. 4:17. He didn't hesitate. He handed me the package. I looked down at the shipping label. The date was correct. The timestamp read 4:17 p.m. I shut the door slowly. The box felt warm in my hands, not from the sun, from being held. Something was still moving inside this hour. I opened the package. It was something I had ordered 2 days earlier. Nothing unusual, except the invoice. The invoice showed the delivery time as 4:18 p.m. I checked my phone. 4:17. I stared at the invoice again. 4:18. That's when I felt it. A subtle shift in the air, like a breath being held. The clock on the wall ticked. The second hand completed its circle. And finally, 4:18 p.m. The relief was immediate, almost embarrassing. I laughed out loud. See, I told myself. A glitch, a temporary system issue, solar interference, something explainable. The sun dipped lower. Shadows lengthened. I made dinner, watched television. Time progressed, normally. By 10:43 p.m., I had almost forgotten about it. Almost. I went to bed. I woke up to light in my eyes. I reached for my phone. 4:17 p.m. I sat upright. The light outside my bedroom window was late afternoon light, not morning. I ran to the kitchen. The clock on the wall read 4:17 p.m. The glass of water I had poured the previous day sat on the counter, half full, unmoved. The package from the courier rested on the table, unopened. I walked to the door. I opened it. The sky was pale blue. Late afternoon. My neighbor sat on his porch, reading. The exact same posture. The exact same page visible between his fingers. I felt cold. I checked the calendar on my phone. The date was the same as yesterday. I watched the seconds tick. At 4:17 and 59 seconds, the second hand hit 12, and the minute changed. 4:18 p.m. The air released. The sun moved. The world exhaled. I stood there, shaking. That was when I understood. The day had not ended. It had reset, but not entirely. Because I remembered. I was the only thing carrying forward. The second reset was worse. This time I tried to break it. At 4:10 p.m., I left my house and drove. Farther than I normally would. I didn't stop until the town was behind me and the highway stretched empty ahead. At 4:16 p.m., I pulled over. I stepped out of the car and stood in the open. No clocks nearby, no walls, just sky. At 4:17 p.m., the world tightened. It's difficult to describe. Imagine every sound lowering in pitch simultaneously. Birds mid-flight slowing slightly, wind pausing between gusts. The second hand on my phone continued, but something beneath it resisted. 4:17. I threw my phone onto the asphalt. It shattered. The screen flickered. 4:17. I waited. A full rotation. Nothing. I screamed into the empty highway. No echo returned. The sky remained frozen in late afternoon. Then, a truck passed. Loud, sudden. It startled me so badly I stumbled backward. The driver glanced at me through the window. I stared at the dashboard clock as it rolled by. 4:17 p.m. Time wasn't stopped. It was contained at exactly 1 full minute later. 4:18 p.m. The truck was gone. The wind resumed. The world moved forward. I realized something terrifying then. The reset didn't care where I was. It cared when I was. I drove home. I waited. At 10:43 p.m. I went to sleep. I woke up to light. 4:17 p.m. Again. But this time, something was different. The water glass was empty. The package was open. I hadn't opened it. The neighbor's porch was empty. The page in his book had turned. Small changes, not resets, adjustments. I began testing it. Each loop I moved something slightly before 4:17. A chair angle, a window position, a note on the table. Sometimes it carried forward. Sometimes it didn't. The hour was deciding, choosing what to preserve. And then it happened. On the fifth loop, at 4:17 p.m., the second hand stopped entirely. No ticking, no rotation, just stillness. The air became heavy. The light outside dimmed slightly, and for the first time, the minute did not complete its cycle. 4:17 remained. The seconds did not move. It wasn't waiting for 4:18. It was watching me. I felt it then. Not the world, not the sky, the hour itself. Like a room I was trapped inside. I whispered, "What do you want?" Nothing responded, but something shifted. The neighbor stepped onto his porch. He wasn't holding a book. He was looking at me. Directly. His expression wasn't confused. It wasn't friendly. It was expectant. I stepped outside. The street was empty. No cars, no birds, no sound, only him. "What time is it?" I called. He didn't answer. He raised his arm slowly, pointed at his wrist. There was no watch there. I looked down at my phone. The cracked screen still displayed 4:17. No seconds. Frozen. When I looked back up, he was closer, halfway across the street. He hadn't walked. He had simply changed position. The light in the sky dimmed further. Late afternoon fading toward something darker. But not evening. Something else. I stepped backward. The ground felt unstable, as if it were preparing to shift beneath me. He took another step. Not walked. Placed. I understood. Then. 4:17 wasn't a glitch. It was a decision point. The hour that refused to end. An open door. Waiting for me to choose whether to move forward or stay. The loops weren't punishment. They were evaluation, testing how I behaved inside repetition, what I changed, what I preserved, what I learned. The world had been advancing to 4 to 18, only when satisfied. And now, it wasn't satisfied. He stopped 10 feet away. The sky flickered faintly. A single sound returned. Tick. My phone vibrated in my hand. 4:17:59. The second hand twitched. He leaned forward slightly, as if listening. And I realized something horrifying. If I allowed it to turn to 4:18, I might not wake up the next day, but if I refused, I would remain here, forever, in this suspended late afternoon. The safest hour of the day, the most deceptive, the one that feels like nothing important happens. I looked at him. He looked at me. The air thickened. The light dimmed further. 4:17:59. Tick. And for the first time, I reached out and turned the minute forward myself. The second hand completed its cycle. 4:18 p.m. The sky snapped to evening. The neighbor was gone. The street was normal. Sound returned. Wind resumed. Time moved. I did not go to sleep that night, and when morning finally came, it was 4:19 p.m.